Okay, special legislation. And what we have on the agenda tonight is one thing, and it is the deer management strategy that Paul, you saw, and Jim, you saw. I think you probably got to look at it. And what this is the culmination of is simply the concern about deer has been raised with City Council and the administration occasionally, year after year. And I think it's important to understand a number of things. One is that it is a concern, and a legitimate concern, for folks that feel they are affected by the intrusion of deer. And on the other side, there are folks who just enjoy looking at deer. And the city's responsibility is, of course, to the whole community. So the approach that we've taken is to realistically, like with all goals, realistically address the goal in a reasonable, responsible way. And over the course of the last couple of years, working primarily with the administration and with the Parks Director, with Jensen Worley, who really deserves credit for putting the pencil to paper and helping to construct this in, as I said, a really comprehensive way. What I believe we have put together will be effective. When implemented, it recognizes personal responsibility. It recognizes the city's ability to assist, and it will also ultimately be effective if any part, or the parts of which is really a three-part program, when those things are implemented. The only other thing I want to add to that is this: we have looked at what other cities do. We've looked at the variety of possibilities that you can use to address these concerns. Trapping, which people may have seen on the news, and Lyndhurst is doing trapping, has created a huge uproar. I took a look at videos of it. Yeah, I guess it's effective, but if you look at the humanity of it, most people think trapping and shooting the bolt into a deer is not humane. We looked at culling, determined culling is within the city, within city parks, is dangerous. It's very expensive, and it is demonstrated to be not overly effective. Sterilization is very difficult and very expensive, and it is not very effective. When you call a herd of deer, like some cities have, when you call a herd, within 1 to 3 years, the herd recreates. And for example, in the city of Solon, in 2003-2004, the city of Solon did deer culling. They killed 1,000 deer at a cost of $500,000, 2003-2004. In 2006, they had to call the deer again because the herd had completely regenerated, for a whole variety of reasons that, when you look at them, it does make sense. When you small down the size of a herd, the deer that are left have more food, they repopulate, recreate the herd, and you're right back to where you are. So I think two things. One is we're going to address the concerns, the issue is that we see the concerns rather that some folks have, and the other part is we're going to continue to address the other things that the community in general is as concerned about, particularly with respect to cost. And so it's a three-part plan that we're going to look at. It's a strategy, and I think it'll be good. And I've asked the Parks Director and I, went over it again. And if Jensen, if you want to kind of go over it topic to topic for us in a kind of a condensed version, then I think everybody will probably get a better understanding of what you put together.
Okay. You touched on some of the items I was going to start with. But the topic of deer management, like you said, it's extremely controversial because none of the management alternatives that we come up with are going to satisfy every person in the city. Ecologically, the urban areas that we have surrounding us can support much higher densities than the residents can, their capacity to tolerate the impacts of those increased numbers of deer. The home range for deer changes from season to season, and it's dependent on a variety of habitat-dependent factors. A lot of the landscape plants that we have surrounding our houses are very palatable to deer, so that's our number one complaint. Sociologically, the tolerance of deer numbers also varies widely amongst residents, and it's not directly correlated with specific deer densities in the community. Similarly, the concerns arise due to distribution discrepancies in the landscape rather than an actual overpopulation. And that's a lot of what we hear that comes into my office, is that there's a herd of deer in their backyard, 10, usually the number's 20, that they say. But it's that the discrepancy of where they're located and the time of year. Usually November, December, October is when we get the most complaints, and that's usually when they're kind of herded up rather than dispersed throughout the city. This makes it nearly impossible to achieve consensus regarding what is an acceptable population of deer in the city and what's not. So the plan that we've developed is to kind of monitor trend data, which will help us see if there is actually a population spike or if it stays pretty consistent throughout time. So we'll kind of review the actual plan. The trend data that we're going to start looking at, the first thing on there is deer vehicle accidents. This has been recorded through the police department for as long as I know.
It's required by the state.
Yeah, required. So what we're going to do is start collecting that data and keep track of it in the Parks Department, make an annual report of all these 5 topics I'm about to go over. Just for review, in 2013 we had 12 deer vehicle accidents, in 2014 we had 23, and in 2015 we had 15.
And I think it's important to add to that, though, what kind of accidents they were, that none of them, I believe none of them caused human injury. When we looked at it last year, we had none that had caused a human injury. And a number of those accidents, when we looked at them, they actually weren't car to deer. Sometimes they were car stopped because of the deer, and the car behind hit the car, that stopped. But if you look at the number of accident reports that we have in the city and you compare it to the number with the deer, it's a relatively small figure, and there is no human injury. Thanks, Jensen.
Comparatively, when you look at the amount of deer vehicle accidents we've had in the city of Medina, and you compare that to Solon, which is 20 square miles, they were averaging 60 to 160 per year when they began their culling. So obviously there's considerable discrepancy between that. So we'll monitor those and keep track of them. The second thing we will track is the number of carcasses that the street department picks up, because, yeah.
Okay, one question on the deer vehicle accidents. Okay, very happy that no humans were hurt in any of this stuff, but there's a financial cost to that. Are we tracking that at all? Because, I hit a deer, it comes out of my deductible. All right? So that's a financial burden on me for something that I had absolutely no control over. Are we doing anything in that regard at all? Not saying that we're going to be responsible for it. No, as a city we can't. But can we get something somewhere from the state, the federal government?
Well, how the accident reports work is it's going to be, first of all, to write the accident report, there has to be, in the officer's opinion, damage greater than $500 to be classified as an accident. So then the ranges are slight or minor, it's been a while since I wrote one, slight or minor, moderate, heavy, or disabling. None of those, however, would have what the repair cost is, because that's separate from the officer. That individual takes their car, gets estimates, the insurance company approves it, that never comes back to the police report.
Okay, so we don't
nor-
collect that data?
Correct,
Okay.
and nor does the state of Ohio. The insurance agencies would have that data, but it's never anything that's tracked as a part of the accident report. So-
We could, though, I suppose,
Collect the report.
we could include in the data that we collect about the number, we could get whether it was, what did, Mayor, what you said, minor, severe.
Yeah, well, minor, moderate, severe, or disabling.
Right, we could use that, that kind of scheme and
Right.
then just keep track of it. Is it a major, minor?
Right.
One of the benefits in town is most of the speed limits are
Low.
25 miles an hour, so
Correct.
Mhm.
but you're right, I mean, a deer can cause a lot of damage.
Yeah.
I hit one time.
Mhm.
Actually, the deer hit me.
Yeah, that's- Any more, $500.
Oh, right.
2 scratches on your fender.
Right, right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Yes, you're going through my window,
We could
right?
probably just ask the police department to forward the entire police report.
Yeah, it's
and
public
collect that.
information.
Well, because there's so few of them.
Yes.
Sure,
Yes.
okay.
So-
Thanks, Jensen.
The second item would be the number of deer carcasses that are picked up on the roadways. There's obviously a lot of accidents that go unreported, so any carcass that we pick up, including in the parks, we'll have that to make a quantifiable number.
I was gonna say, I know, you guys pick up a lot of different carcasses, but do you have deer that often, or?
It's hit and miss, no pun intended. To
Yeah, got hit by the car.
Yes, I got-
Jansen's
yeah.
point, though, 3 days later, we won't get a report, but then someone will have a dead deer in their backyard. And there's been no police report associated with it, and there's other occurrences. But there's skunks, there's the rabbits, and what we do, we pick up carcasses regularly. As far as deer, I don't have that number. I wish,
You had no reason to get.
no, and we
Right.
really
So-
haven't. But we'll
So now we're gonna
continue
change that to
monitor
do it. The thing to keep in mind is there will not be a direct correlation between the accidents and the deer carcasses. There are some accidents where the deer is fatally injured or dispatched by a police officer because it's so severely injured. There are other ones where the deer runs away, and it may end up dead somewhere in the city, it may end up in the township, or one hit in the township may end up in the city, just because of how adjacent we are. There are others that may die of some illness or ailment or age or whatever, and then there's a third group that somebody may have injured during hunting season with an arrow, with a bullet, and that deer survives for a while and then sooner or later succumbs to the injury. So there's a variety of things where we could end up with a deer carcass that may or may not be related to vehicle accidents. So just something to keep in
Right.
mind.
good points.
Good.
That takes us to the third thing we'll be monitoring, which is community surveys. I guess it's not really a number, it's more of collecting the reports and looking at the damage that each individual has. I included with the packet the survey. It's very similar to what the state had recommended, that communities ask residents. It talks about landscape damage, their estimated damage to their property, so we could quantify that one. And ask them about what measures they took to deer-proof their property, which we'll touch on here shortly. And then who they contacted as far as the point of contact for their complaint. So this we would put on the city website. It would be available to the residents to fill out and either mail in or use a online survey company like SurveyMonkey, and we can collect those And if they have any questions or anything, also give contact information for the Parks Department. The fourth item is deer damage complaints. We've never really formally had a form that we would fill out. We never really kept track of complaints. This would be just a simple spreadsheet that we keep track of the calls that come in. If we answered it over the phone, we could put in the comments what was discussed. But if we actually wanted a site visit, we could offer, the city could offer 15 minutes of consulting, very similar to what we do with our forestry department. We offer the residents 15 minutes of consulting on private property. This would be the same situation to discuss the damage on their property, assess what methods they're taking to deter the deer from their own property, and make recommendations as to what they could try differently. We'll touch on that a little bit on our 5-step process at the bottom of the page. So we'll keep track of those complaints, monitor them, and record which ward they come from, and so we have an idea of where our concerned areas are. The 5th step, which is probably one of the most important, we did this back in 2012 when we were discussing the aerial infrared surveys. Those were very expensive, so we implemented in 2012 a visual deer survey. And what we did was we divided the city into 4, obviously we used the 4 wards as the dividing lines, and we selected areas that had open fields where we could go between the hours of 5 a.m. and 7 a.m. and use spotlights to visually count the deer. Those locations are identified on the survey sheet. We can add more to it, and we probably will. At that time when we did it in 2012, it was done on 2 separate days with 2 separate vehicles, and we averaged around 38 deer that we saw just driving in these particular areas. And what that was telling us was where potential bedding areas were. We usually saw them in the relatively the same general location as we visited the separate sites. So the plan moving forward would be to continue that, to monitor if we have any spikes in population growth moving forward.
That's it. Paul, do you or Jim have either questions so far?
Oh, okay.
Good. Okay. Thanks, Jensen. Go ahead.
The second part of the process would be to improve our public relations, because as of right now, we really don't have any resources besides talking to people on the telephone. So the first step would be to provide the list of deer deterrents and technical guidance, which will be found on the City of Medina website. What we've done is compile a list modeled off after what the state had provided, as well as we kind of made it our own. We included prices for each individual item as a request from Councilman Lamb. We also included the links, so as you're scrolling through it on our website, you can click the direct link, which will take you to where the specific products are sold. So just kind of for review, some of the deterrence methods that you could implement. If trees are getting rubbed up by bucks, usually in the fall, you could purchase tree guards. I know that the city forestry department has probably about 1,000 of these, and we put them on all of our newly planted trees. It's just a cost that we incur, and they're a couple of bucks, and they really protect against all that. Landscape plants, we included a link to the Division of Wildlife on there, where you can find a lot of different varieties of perennials and annuals and woody plants that deer generally dislike. That all depends on the season and the amount of snowpack that we have, because there's no truly deer-resistant plant. There's just less than desirable.
If the deer is really hungry,
Right.
it's going to eat it.
Right. So when you figure out, when a resident is trying to figure out the best way to implement a deterrent on their property, you have to kind of incorporate a number of things, not just one. You can't plant all deer resistant plants. You might have to incorporate some sprays and repellents or other alternatives. There's also deer bags and deer clips, which are organic ways to deter deer. You can find those in local garden centers. And sprays and repellents like Deer Be Gone, Liquid Fence, information on all those. Motion activated sprinklers, which are very, very successful. Basically, they're,
Witness that?
yeah. There's some people over in Ward 2 that have them.
They also drive parks directors out of their backyard.
Yes, I forget to tell you about them. But basically, they're motion detection. As soon as a deer walks in front of it, the sprinkler sprays and immediately scares them and any unwanted visitors
That
off the
could
property.
have dual purpose too, if you've got some sort of prowler in the backyard. That'd come on, that'll wake them up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then there's also audible deterrents that work on dogs and deer that can be implemented. So this will be a resource, valuable resource to residents that haven't tried to deter the deer from their own property. The second part of PR, we've discussed it a lot of ward meetings. Typically comes up about individuals that are feeding deer. There are a number of drawbacks from feeding deer. It can attract unwanted predators and rodents, changes movement patterns, attracts them to residential areas. Also changes their digestive system, which can entirely change their diet, increase the chances for disease and death, and it can also increase fertility, reproduction, and survival rates. So if there are residents feeding, they need to do it responsibly. So we're recommending that we do some utility bill stuffings. They kind of outline some of these concerns with feeding because we can't enforce or develop an ordinance specifically for deer. So the best thing we can do is try to educate the public on the problems associated with feeding.
To that point, could we, if you can't do one specifically for deer, could we incorporate a couple of pest-type wildlife, deer, geese, I guess these ground moles or whatever the heck they're called, that some of my neighbors behind me think it's just wonderful to be able to feed all this wildlife. No, it's not.
There are communities that have ordinances like that. Some individuals have shared them with us, and I know Law Director Greg Huber has reviewed them. And one, it would be very hard to enforce that the corn that you put out is not for a rabbit or a squirrel, and it's specifically for a deer. So the enforcement thing would be very difficult, as well as arguing it if it went to the next level in the courts.
You know, I think one thing to add, though, to this one area about not feeding the deer that's important is this. You know, while, you know, at the beginning I said, you know, we're not going to call, these are the reasons, we're not going to do the trap and bolt. Those are the things we're not doing. On the other hand, don't misinterpret that to mean we want the deer in town. You know, while they may be fun to look at out your window, they are big and they are wild animals. And we live in a 17 square miles in this city that is, I don't think there's one lot left here to build. You know, we have 780 acres of parkland and a lot of open space. But be that as it may, the deer don't belong in the city, and it's not healthy for the deer to be in the city. And among all the things that you said, they also just become acclimated to humans. No different than a raccoon, so that you can go out, I can go out in my backyard and I can get within 15 feet of the deer, and I kind of enjoy doing it, but it's not, I'm not feeding the deer either. And I think it's important for people to know, just because if you really care about the deer, then you won't feed them. Let them go off in the farthest corner of the park, or leave town and go into a larger area where they can have a natural habitat. An urban area where we live is no place for the deer. So I think it's important that nobody misinterprets this as, we want the deer to come in and we're fine. Not really. We see it as a concern of a number of people in town, and we want to address it. But if you are feeding the deer, you're simply making the problem as it exists worse, and worse for folks, that may be your neighbor, and really worse for the deer.
Got a question, salt licks. What other animal uses salt, or salt licks put out for besides deer?
Big cattle use it. No cattle lick? Salt?
Pardon?
Cattle.
Cattle? I don't think we have cattle in town.
But that's the only other animal I think that.
Okay, so could we ban salt licks?
I think when I talked to John Coyne about this, as well as the law director, they said it would be, wherever you go in this, it would be almost impossible to enforce. I mean, to go to court and get you're going to get a conviction on somebody with a salt lick in their backyard. The response I got from somebody was, I'd love to have that. I'd love to be the person who had this. I'd want to be the lawyer representing the person with the salt lick or the stuff. So I figured, I think at this, where we are right now, I think what we have put together is a really responsible, smart program that Jensen's wrapping up here. I'm not sure we're going to go with an ordinance yet, or that we can go with an ordinance.
This is more of a plan. Did you have a question back there, sir?
Well, it's not really a question. I'm here because we do have a deer problem. And first, let me say this. I don't want to see any harm done to the animals. I don't. That's the last thing I want to do. I would like the problem fixed. I don't think the seriousness, now you brought up a point. You walked off and you could be within 10, 15 feet of the deer. I have that too. I have 3 bucks that I have pictures of that are in my backyard. It's not in my backyard. There's a field behind me that's owned by somebody else that does put out food. Now, I have a small dog that I put out there that I saw one of these bucks rear up on. It's going to hook him. When that deer kills my dog, what rights do I have? Is there any rights that I have to protect my animal?
Well,
or anything that's on my property? There are deer that come up right to my deck that I have to step out with my dog. Now I know that we have very young children that I see out in the backyard all the time. We don't have young children. But what's going to happen when one of these deer rear up and hits one of these, comes down on top of one of these children's head and kills them?
Well,
and it is a possibility.
Yeah, and I hear what you're saying, and particularly the part about the person who lives behind you is feeding the deer.
Yes.
Which is, I think if you look at that in total, that's probably the biggest part of that issue, is that feeding of the deer, contiguous to your property. The other part about the deer, though, I think that rear up, I think, is that deer simply do that, I think, is they don't do it as an offense as much as they simply do that rear up thing with their feet. And there is no record, I don't know about a dog, but there is no record anywhere of a deer actually, attacking, deer not attacking a person like that. I don't.
Not in the city or ever.
Only
It
in
does
hunting, yeah, there's been hunters that've been attacked, but they're going up to a wounded deer, but I don't know what you're saying, Mr. Lim, we haven't had a deer attack.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if I was looking at what's the area that we want to deal with through what we're doing, is to address that, what we can do to protect people's private property. People have to be responsible themselves. You have personal responsibility, and we are as concerned about people's private property. We are concerned as a city when people have an issue or a concern. So we want to address those things, but as part of that, we really want to address, as I said, and emphasize to people, don't, do not feed the deer. Don't feed them, because you may like looking at them, but it may cause an issue, whatever the issues you're going to have on your property. And, we are working to deal with that, and we think that if you implement the strategies that Jensen has helped us put together, that will certainly have an impact. I know for a fact that some of those deer deterrents, because I tested some of them.
They don't work.
Well, they work, but it depends.
Be gone.
They can work for a time. You have to have more than one strategy. You can use the noise one and it'll work for a while, but then you may have to do something different. And I know that what I've read about the water deterrent is one of the better ones, because they do not want to be sprayed with that water. But I think what we're working on is trying to put together a whole package of things that can be done to address these concerns. So if you implement them as a strategy, they should be effective. And that's within the limited scope that we have to work on this. The surveys that we're talking about, the survey is to find out exactly how many deer do we have here. Because they move around, and so at one time it looks like there's a herd here and a herd there and a herd there, but it may very well be the same herd, because we've never counted over the number that Jensen has referenced. I lived on South Court Street, and I was sharing with somebody that day before yesterday, I took my dog out at night, and I back up to West Park, but I live across the street from somebody who may be feeding the deer. And the deer come through West Park, through the woods at Ellicanavan, and I counted 9 deer in my backyard, behind my backyard, and I watched them walk out toward West Park, and I'm sure they crossed South Court Street, and then I'm sure they went off, across the street and went someplace, because we have a brand new park that butts 57, so if you go across South Court Street by West Park, there are huge open areas of land. But the only way we're going to deal with this is by implementing, a pretty smart, comprehensive strategy, and I'm convinced that that's what we have. But everybody's going to have to participate in it. Everybody's going to have to do a little bit to help to make this work. And the other important part about the plan that Jensen's helped put together is that the city will come out and take a look at property damage. The city will come out and talk about what can be done to help you to alleviate an issue, particularly for folks that live by the open space or by the parks. We have almost 800 acres of parkland in the city, so no matter what we do, we're going to have some deer. No matter what we do, some of those deer are going to wander onto private property. So let's go ahead and finish this up.
It actually takes us to the third part of the process, which is the 5 steps that residents should take to recognize that they have a deer problem. That's the first step, is to recognize the problem, whether it be landscape damage, trees being rubbed, garden damage, or anything else. What they would do from that point is log on to the City of Medina website to receive the technical guidance, which is what we talked about earlier in public relations, on ways that they can address the concerns on their own property and select the best one to implement. The third step, once they've tried deer deterrents and they're not successful, would be to contact the Parks Department, where we can file the formal damage complaint on our spreadsheet. We can visit the site, take a look at what they've tried to deter the deer, as well as make some recommendations. If nothing comes from that, then we would then defer to the Division of Wildlife. The Division of Wildlife does offer technical guidance over the phone to residents, as well as scheduling site visits to discuss a little bit further in depth than what the city would do.
Okay, so what we have is you're really trying to get a baseline of numbers. We're going to try to get a better baseline of numbers. We're looking at the value of recommended deterrents, and we're looking at getting a baseline on what damage there is. Is that pretty close to what you'd say? Okay, and don't get me wrong, because we want to hear from, concerns from residents, because that's going to help us deal with it. And as I said, we're not going to call and we're not going to do those things, but we are going to try to implement this. And the only way we're going to be able to implement it effectively is with the help of the folks that are having the concerns right now. That's we're going to be able to see how this works. And I also, before we continue on, I want to compliment Jensen on the work he's done in the administration with the mayor to get this put together, because we have recognized that this is a very legitimate concern. And we are, and we don't want you to feel like your property is not being protected or the city's not moving forward, because we are. And I think that this will be helpful. Jim?
I wanted to thank Jansen too. It's a nice plan. I'm impressed.
I agree.
Rose?
I agree. Jansen did put it together on a very nice package here. It's something definitely that I'm willing to try to make sure it works, but I don't know that we want to close the door on calling right away. I think maybe down the road, if none of these other things don't work, or we see that, yeah, they worked for a while and now they're not working, we got to go to plan B, C, or D, whatever. I would like to keep those other options open. I don't want to say as a last resort, but I don't want to close the door on them, because it may be the only option we have at that point in time. Because certainly we don't want any little children or any human hurt because these deer are taking over the backyard. I know Joel and I were walking last night and we came across, there were 6 deer. I don't know if it were the same 3 deer twice, but there were 6 deer that we came across that definitely gave us a start. And they ran away. They weren't human acclimated yet, obviously. They ran away, but that's back in Forest Meadows. All right, backs up against Reagan Park. And they could have attacked us if they wanted to. All right?
Must have recognized
Can I ask
you.
a question? Has anybody else complained about, or even, I don't know, we haven't officially complained, but we saw a couple coyote out in the field. I believe these deer were drawn. I've never seen these before, and all of a sudden, this year, I've seen a couple coyote in the backfield. Again, I have a small dog or whatever, and I know how coyote travel in packs. Has anybody else complained about that the deer are bringing that in? Plus, not to mention, I've seen red fox. The red fox I'm not concerned about. The coyote I am.
I don't know if
I know where there's one. I've heard about one or 2 coyote in town. I have heard
2 of them out in my backyard, out in the backfield.
Bruce?
There's a pack that frequents behind Halifax, where the, I guess that would be west of where the cluster homes are.
Like Gloucester down
Back there, yeah, and we hear those at night every once in a while. And the problem, Bill, is it's all fine and good that you're not feeding the animals and that, but the problem is there's not a lot of predators feeding on these deer. So how are they going to be eliminated? Does produce 1 to 2 fawns a year. It's just going to multiply. And by not feeding them, and I'm not discounting what Jensen said, it's important, but these deer are just going to keep reproducing, and there's going to be more and more of them.
Well,
and you're going to have to address it. I agree. Birth control does not work. It's absolutely, it will not work on a free-ranging herd. It has moderate success, or minimal success, I should say, on a captured herd that's in a fenced-in property. It's not going to work for a free-ranging herd. Culling is expensive. Other communities have instituted a bow hunt, and it has to be on specific properties. And since we do have very many parks within the city proper, it might be a way to go. And there are certain things that you can do it, and you can do it very safely. I'll give you an example. I lived in Eagan, Minnesota, and they were being overrun with their deer herd. And what they instituted was a bow hunt, and it was on certain days in the park and at certain times. So it was from dawn till 10:30 in the morning. They closed the park off for visitors during that time, and they allowed bow hunters to go in. You had to qualify. They had to do, they had to pass certain accuracy tests, so forth. But here's a way to do it, one, without cost to the city, because now you charge for a permit to do this. So it'll bring some money in to cover some of the costs that maybe you might have associated with it. But you certainly aren't paying, you know, anywhere between $200 and $500 for culling, so it's not that way. The herd can be reduced, and it can be reduced continually. I mean, my house backs up to Greenwood. I've got two different groups. I've got a group of 7 does, and I got a group of 3 does. And it's cyclical. They travel a circuitous route that's probably 3 to 4 days. So every 3 to 4 days, you got 10 deer running through Greenwood. And the mayor can attest to it. They love his backyard.
I think part of what we're working on is to get a baseline to see the numbers. And because one of the numbers that I don't know if we've talked about that we don't really have is how deep is the concern? Not to say, to discount it, but you know, we do hear about it in certain groups, in certain areas of town, at certain neighborhood meetings. But compared to many other issues that we hear more universally, the numbers actually that we could stack up right now are really, really pretty small. Of the people that have actually said, this is a concern, this has happened in my yard, I want you to deal with this problem, is a smaller number. So when you look at that, without knowing exactly how many folks, you know, have raised the issue, and then if you look at the cost incumbent with anything that we do, even the cost of what we're doing right now, which is not, you know, which is not minor, if you look at it to go any further, the costs begin to escalate. And if the concern is a concern of, you know, 35 or 40 people, and we think we can deal with it pretty effectively through this program, that's going to be the first. That's going to be the first step. And the mayor, you've had, you know, we have talked at length, I think, about bow hunting and.
Well, my concern, Bruce, is, you know, I'm not sure where this area was where you were before. When you say close the park, all of our parks are walkable. So we could put police officers on every driveway in there.
You just have to put signs up, notices.
What,
Our kids still walk
gonna
through
read
the-
those
yeah.
signs?
You know, and
Some 10-year-old kid chasing his buddy with a bike, are they
and then
gonna read
again,
those signs?
you are talking bow hunting, and I don't remember hearing the last time of a fatality associated with bow hunting, except for maybe somebody falling out of a tree stand.
No, but there's a deflection of arrow, because we've talked to a gentleman next door here and was talking about an Independence house, someone was target practicing, and a deflected arrow ran over 2 properties over, so you have that issue.
Yeah.
It's just a tough,
It is, but
tough to regulate.
But if you do it properly, and there's cities that do it consistently, even here in Ohio, Egan happens to be where the airport is in Minneapolis. And there's a lot more park space there than there are here in Medina. But the problem that you run into is that these deer are going to keep increasing, and there could be more. And I'm not discounting the study that Jensen made, you know, but I guarantee you over at the 2 parks, I'm sorry, the one on Reagan.
Reagan Park.
Reagan. There's more than 38 deer in there, and that's way too much for a landmass that size. Your studies don't even show the 10 that are in Greenwood. And they run from the 10 acres in Greenwood over to a 5-acre plot on the other side of Dover to another, 5-acre plot of woods, just a little bit farther to the west. They're there, there's a lot of them, and because nothing is taking them out, they're gonna live an average of probably 3 to 5 years, somewhere around that. And they're just gonna increase. So you're gonna have to address it by removing these deer. And trapping, you're right, the trapping could be considered inhumane. Live trapping and transporting is no more than a pie in the sky than birth control is, because what happens is they get trapped, they get stressed, and they die. And the expense with trapping is outrageous. And then where are you gonna dump them? Who wants them? Who's gonna take them? The only real, you've got two choices, bow hunting or lead poisoning.
Well, let me, and I appreciate all your input, Bruce. We hear what you're saying, but here's my recommendation is that, I think this is a good strategy. I think you put together a good plan. What I'd like to see is the community get 100% behind it. Everybody can do their part. Do the best we can and see what the outcome is. We need to get a baseline. We need to find out how many deer there really are. Look at the number of folks who see this as a concern. Look at what the damage is. Get all this information together. You've done a great job in putting this together. Let's follow up on it. Get it on the website. Get the "Don't Feed the Deer" thing out in the utility bills, and we will continue to monitor. We'll get the information, and we'll come back and look at it again. Of course, we see each other all the time, so we can talk about where we're going with it. But it's important that the community takes a look at it. Everybody sees what they can do, and that if folks have a concern with it, follow up, contact the city, do the survey, and help us out so that we can work the best we can to address the issue.
I like the plan. I agree we need to get at least a baseline so we know exactly the size of the problem we're dealing with, so that whatever strategy is put together is the right one. So definitely that. Definitely get the word out, but not only limiting it to don't feed the deer, don't feed the wildlife, okay? Because you got the geese. Forest Meadows has got the geese problem and the deer problem. Okay, we got to get rid of both of them. All right, and so let's not limit the don't feed to just the deer.
Can we feed the birds?
Only if your topping's the bag.
Okay.
So.
I think this is good. I think it's a good first step, and let's see where we go from here and what we need to do once we get some data.
I just got two things. One, I don't want to take all the credit for the plan. The mayor and Nino helped an awful lot, along with Jeff Westerfield from the Division of Wildlife. So I gotta give credit where credit's due. Secondly, you're exactly right. This is a baseline, and it's vastly improved from what we've done in the last 4 years. Everything's going to be collected. We're going to know where we're at. We're going to see those spikes, and then we can consider whether it be an infrared survey or taking action in other ways. But to put the cart before the horse and not have the data, I think would be premature, and we got to make sure we do our homework to ensure that we're making the best decision for the community.
Okay. Thanks. Thank you, Jensen. Mayor, thank you for your help
Yes,
as well. I know you were involved, and Nino, as always, thank you. We don't need to vote on this, I don't believe. We're just...
Right, no,
we're just saying good.
It's an administrative thing.
It's good.
Right.
All right. Meeting's adjourned. Thank you. Good job.